Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Hello and welcome to the program for June the 8th, 2021, which in the Hebrew calendar equates to the 28th of Sivan, 5781. I am Walter Bingham. It has been a week like no other in the recent history of our beleaguered little country. Most of our brave frontline citizens, dissatisfied with the outcome of our wars with Hamas, are still suffering the effects of the most recent 11 days of continuous rocket attacks on their towns and villages, and a great number of their homes suffered considerable damage, either from direct hits or shrapnel. But structural damage to property, however extensive, painful and inconvenient, can be rectified in a reasonably short time, and although their financial loss is far from being settled, that too can be concluded in due course. I believe that I express the sentiment of all our citizens when I say that we feel for our brothers and sisters, particularly those who have lost dear ones, and hope that they shall only hear good news in future, and that those who have suffered injuries shall have a full and speedy recovery. But the psychological damage, particularly to our children, is a very long-term problem. For many, spending times in bomb shelters has been a considerable part of their young lives. Even school had to be held in shelters without daylight and playgrounds. The consequences manifest themselves daily. Israel finally has a government because Bennett has capitulated. Literally, minutes before the deadline at midnight between the 2nd and 3rd of June, Yair Lapid informed the president that he has succeeded in preventing a fifth election and formed what he called a government of change by reaching agreement with Naftali Bennett's Yamina party, Bennett Gantz's Blue and White, Merav Michaelis Labour, Avigdor Lieberman's Israel Beitenu, Gideon Saar's New Hope, Nitzan Horowitz's Meretz parties, and the Arab Ram party, led by Mansour Abbas. Despite the fact that the president's mandate had been given to Yair Lapid, the first term of prime minister, according to the rotation agreement, will be Naftali Bennett, despite a legal appeal based on basic law. Keep it here, there's more after the break.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
The first term of Prime Minister, according to the rotation agreement, will be Naftali Bennett, despite a legal appeal based on basic law. It is indeed a government of change, but hardly change for the better. Not only are the constituent parties' views and declared policies so divergent that agreement on almost any topic is unlikely, I heard that Lapid and Bennett have even agreed on a mutual veto, making agreement even more difficult. It is the first time in the history of Israel that an Arab party has become part of the government. For those of us who are staunch supporters of the one and only Jewish state, this inclusion is not only dangerous, but the price paid for their support is out of all proportion to the result of the March 2021 election, in which they just managed to exceed the threshold and therefore gained the minimum of 4 Knesset seats. The Ram party, also known as UAL, United Arab List, will chair the Knesset's Interior Committee, the Committees on Arab Society Affairs, and receive the position of Deputy Knesset Speaker, a post that on occasions conducts the business of the Jewish state in our parliament. In addition, several of the restrictions of Bedouin building will be lifted and illegal villages in the Negev will be granted legitimacy. All that's on the program to get their support. The Arutz Sheva news service reports that the new government will ensure that Arab representation in public offices and companies is proportionate to their percentage of the general population. In short, we have installed a Trojan Horse in the highest echelons of government and civil service. It is reported that our current and prospective Defense Minister, Benny Gantz, who last week met with President Biden in Washington, has agreed to a building freeze in Judea and Samaria as a precursor to negotiations on a two-state solution that Biden wants to initiate. Well, with 700,000 Jews living in Judea, Samaria, and eastern Jerusalem, one does not have to be a scientist to know that a two-state solution is not only dead, but impossible to reawaken. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority and chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization, said more than once, and I quote, "In a final resolution, we would not see the presence of a single Israeli civilian or soldier on our lands." In 2013, Abbas told U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry that no Israeli settlers or border forces could remain in a future Palestinian state, and that Palestinians see as illegal all Jewish settlement buildings within the land occupied in the 1967 Middle East War. Now that, of course, includes eastern Jerusalem, including the Western Wall and the Temple Mount. In my view, this government, in which all constituent parties can be expected to pull in different directions, will not be able to survive the test of time and therefore collapse within a year. And now I address myself to Naftali Bennett. Ever since you came on the scene several years ago and you told me about your plans, I believed in you, I advocated for you, and I hoped that one day you will be in government. I liked your idea of a Jewish state, a state for Jews, that also includes the non-Torah observant. But when you split from the Jewish Home Party in 2018 to form the New Right, not only I, but most of your supporters considered it a wrong step towards breaking up the right-wing unity. Your defeat in the April 2019 election proved us right. You did not even pass the electoral threshold. That government fell apart due to the intransigence of Avigdor Lieberman and his Israel Our Home Party, who insisted on passing the so-called draft law aimed at the ultra-Orthodox exemption from military or national service if they attend Torah study institutes. Your newly formed party, Yamina, gained just 3 seats in the election of September 2019, but it was not under your leadership, but with Ayelet Shaked at the helm. In the following month, in order to strengthen Yamina, you tried to affiliate with every small right-wing party from Amir Peretz's Jewish Home to Moshe Feiglin's Zehut, but failed because you wanted to be at the helm. An exaggerated ego has unfortunately taken over your ability to think logically and act rationally. You are prepared to accept any option so long as it catapults you to the top. No principles, in other words, no integrity, no sense of honor, no moral conscience, and no scruples. That is shown by your swinging from the political left to the right making contradictory announcements in your search for fame, leaving your erstwhile followers confused to the extent of having been ridiculed. The 6-seat Knesset representation of Yamina certainly deserves a ministerial post, or perhaps even two, but your insistence to become Prime Minister is arrogant. The Italians would call you rompiscatole, a pain in the neck. I have some stronger words with which to describe your political manipulations. Naftali, you have been unmasked, and I regret to have given you my vote in the last 3 elections. You owe me an apology for having misled me with lies to get my vote. It is regrettable that the stability and unity of our government hinges on who gets which ministerial post instead of on the ability and qualifications of prospective ministers. Now that you have achieved your aim, I hope that you will come to your senses and revert to the policy of defending our heartland, Judea and Samaria, from the attempts to establish there a Palestinian state. Now, change of subject. The families of Lieutenant Hadar Goldin and Oron Shaul have been waiting 5 years for the terror organization Hamas to return the bodies of their fallen sons who were killed during the Gaza war in 2014. Equally anxious to hug their sons are the families of reportedly mentally unstable civilian Avera Mengistu and also of Hisham al-Sayed, who entered the Gaza Strip on their own 6.5 years ago and are Hamas prisoners and bargaining chips. Emboldened by Israelis' acquiescence to U.S. pressure to agree to a ceasefire, Hamas advised the head of Egypt's intelligence service, Abbas Kamel, that they are prepared to begin indirect negotiations with Israel for a prisoner swap. We are confident that we are able to extract our rights, he said, and extract is the operative word, hinting that he wants Israel to exchange 1,111 security prisoners, and the names were to be released at a later date. Considering that Israel's commitment to leave not one of its soldiers and citizens as prisoners in Arab hands has never left the agenda, we are reminded that the soldier Gilad Shalit, who spent more than 5 years in a Hamas prison, was released in exchange for 1,027 terrorists, 280 of which were serving life sentences, and those released were collectively responsible for the killing of 569 Israelis. That exchange caused more than ripples. 53% of the general population thought that the Israeli government dropped some of its principles, and approximately 40% were against that exchange. We are now possibly approaching a similar situation, and if an exchange deal would be agreed, considering the composition of the new government, a disproportionate exchange may again result. How many terrorists are worth one Israeli? We would not have to face this dilemma if Israel had finished the job it set out to do after we were attacked, and not surrendered to the American after 11 days of success last May. Let me have your views by email to walter@israelnewstalkradio.com. But please be brief, and you will always get my personal reply. You can also post your comment in the appropriate space on the Walter Bingham file page of our website. On July 9th, the 7-year term of office of the current President of the State of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, is coming to an end. As former member of the Likud party and Speaker of the Knesset for 4 years, he has served our country well during turbulent times. He has led the Knesset during several no-confidence motions, the debates about the Goldstone reports initiated by the anti-Israel UNHRC, the United Nations Human Rights Council, and the Gaza flotilla incident led by the motor vessel Marmara and its consequences. He presided over the most recent war with the terror regime in Gaza, as well as many more noteworthy events. Here my assessment of our new president after the break.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things. But at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Shalom, I'm Leah Aharoni. Join me on my show, News from the Torah. Each Sunday, we'll use the weekly Torah portion as a prism for understanding the news today. Listen to News from the Torah to gain clarity about the times we're living in and to understand your own spiritual path in the process. News from the Torah every Sunday on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
On July 9th, the 7-year term of office of the current president of the State of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, is coming to an end. As president, it fell to Reuven Rivlin to mandate the potential prime ministers following the unprecedented 4 general elections in just over 2 years. It is still a distinct possibility that one or another Knesset member may throw a spanner in the works, and no government may be able to be formed, and that it would now be the duty of the next president, whose almost first task would be to make the difficult choice of tasking a Knesset member with the formation of government, following a 5th election, which was scheduled for October this year. I say this because Lapid and Bennett have not yet presented their coalition agreement with the signatures of all parties involved to the Knesset Secretariat. The Knesset Speaker, Yair Levin, feels unable to announce the new government and said failure to present the agreements gives rise to suspicion that the various parties concerned wish to conceal their dealings and prevent both public discussion and debate in the Knesset. End of quote. I can see that this is an ominous sign that they want to prevent transparency of the promises and concessions that the parties made between them. The voters are entitled to clarity and to be given the details that led to the coalition. Back to the presidency. The period of office is a single term of 7 years. The presidency is a largely ceremonial position, wielding little real power, and in my view, it should ideally not be held by a former politician. President Rivlin was a career politician, and that became apparent in some of his actions. But he served the country well, and I wish him a healthy and tranquil retirement. As was expected, the Knesset has voted overwhelmingly for Isaac Herzog, who, after all, is one of theirs. A former chairman of the Labour Party and currently chairman of the Jewish Agency. However, the several opinion polls registering the view of the Israeli public showed a large majority in favor of Miriam Peretz. The Israeli public is far more politically informed and intelligent than our politicians believe them to be, or indeed would prefer them to be. Israelis did not believe that another career politician should be their president. Miriam Peretz, a teacher by profession who lives in Givat Ze'ev and works as a civil servant at the Ministry of Education, lost 2 sons in the defense of our country and understands well the trials and tribulations of ordinary people. Politicians, on the other hand, live in a world spiked with personal animosities and schemes to impose damage on their political opponent. Not exactly the qualities Israel needed in our state president. However, Isaac Herzog, the son of a former president, has now been elected and will begin his duties after June the 9th, when the current president, Reuven Rivlin, steps down. Having said all that, I now fully support our new president. May God guide him in all he does, and may he have a healthy and successful term of office. I've been giving some thoughts to the reasons that caused the masses of Arabs to leave their homelands and move to Western countries seeking asylum. I reasoned that they wished to live a life free from restrictions imposed by the fundamentalist Muslim regimes, where women do not have the freedom to express themselves, neither socially nor culturally, where their every move is controlled and supervised by men in the household and even by their own male children, where the heads of mosques control their life. The aim of those asylum seekers, I thought, is surely to escape from the extremism of life dictated by their religious leaders and the control of the myopic education of their children, and to live a free life. Countries like Sweden had good experiences from the Jewish refugees who settled post-World War II and appreciated the opportunity to begin a new life. They followed the local laws in their everyday activities while keeping a Jewish lifestyle in their homes. After a short time, they became an asset to their host countries. I know because my mother was among them. Sweden, like other Western democratic governments, were certain that the Arab so-called refugees would also happily settle into the way of life of their adoptive countries, having left oppressive regimes. But apparently not so. Isn't it ironic that they left the Muslim countries of their birth because of oppressive Islamist rule, and now they are demonstrating against Western democratic states in which they received asylum and demand Sharia law, wanting to change their host countries into the system which was their professed reason for having left their home countries in the first place? In both Stockholm and Malmö, there are Arab-occupied no-go areas where even the police are hesitant to enter. Denmark is cancelling the temporary asylum visas of several thousand Syrians because they say that their country is now safe for them to return. The real reason may be different. The realization of the consequences resulting from Europe's humanitarian action came too late. I recently met with a group of young men and women who, so I was told, come from ultra-Orthodox families. They were singing Yiddish songs, but did not wear tzitzit, or most not even a head cover. The women were dressed in jeans and short-sleeved T-shirts or similar, not exactly the dress code I expected. On further inquiring, I learned that there is an active organization that caters for young people who have decided to leave the lifestyle of their families and lead a life of modern youth. But whereas most young people in Israel learn and speak English, only one of that group had any knowledge of that important language, and then only scant. Their first language was Yiddish, and they spoke, of course, also Hebrew. Why is that, I asked. It seemed that in the Hasidic, the ultra-Orthodox world, the educational emphasis is on learning scriptures to the exclusion of unnecessary subjects. In a future program, I hope to have some in-depth interviews with young people who have left the Hasidic life, how difficult it is to adjust to the strange world of secularism, or, in a few cases, modern orthodoxy, and how it affects the relationship with their families. One of several support organizations for the escapees from orthodoxy is called Out for Change, and according to their brochure, 1,000 young people leave the fold every year. Now that there is a change of government, the policy towards the ultra-Orthodox will undergo some scrutiny, particularly in the field of financial subsidies. The new finance minister, Avigdor Lieberman, is also known for his opposition to the exemption from military and national service for attendees of yeshivot, Torah learning institutes, and some policy changes in that field can also be expected. The shameful decision of Israel's police to cancel the flag march through Jerusalem was another victory for Hamas. It is not only an insult to Israel's flag, but shows the state's capitulation to the terrorists in our midst. It is unbelievable that the police considers it impossible to protect Jewish youth who want to march peacefully through the streets of Israel's capital city, a long-time tradition, carrying flags and singing songs. Yet they blocked the city streets last week, causing loss to local traders, in order to allow a private organization, the LGBTQ crowd, to show off and promote their devious lifestyle, despite the fact that their display of scantily dressed individuals offends many more Jews of all ages than the number of protesting Arab youth at Damascus Gate. I wonder if Open House, the LGBTQ's organization that organized the march, were made to pay the cost for the extra police and the road control personnel needed. A march by our youth carrying flags to show support for our Jewish state usually takes place on Jerusalem Day, but due to the recent war with Hamas it was postponed until this coming Thursday, June the 10th. Whilst I don't agree with those who intend to defy police orders, it is disgraceful that Israel's police, backed by the government, considered it offensive to our Muslim residents for Jews to show pride in the flag of the Jewish state. Shame on them. Don't move the dial. There's more to come after this break.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobiker, your political hitman.
Political Hitman airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Welcome back to part 3 of the program. Following the unforgivable cancellation of the Flag March, it's time to play some appropriate music. So here is Lenny Solomon singing the title song from his album Jewish Pride.
Of their Jewish community, and what they are all saying is very plain to see. They're sending a message to you and me. We'd like to learn all there is to learn. We'd like to know all there is to know. We've got this feeling that is coming through real strong. It's the start of something big. We can't be wrong. Jewish pride, Jewish pride. We've got Jewish pride. We won't let it hide, 'cause it comes from deep inside. So shout it out loud, Jewish pride. Across loud and clear in every high school, in every city that you walk. These words are shouted for everyone to hear. We'd like to learn all there is to learn. We'd like to know all there is to know. We've got this feeling that is coming through real strong. It's the start of something big. We can't be wrong. Jewish pride, Jewish pride. We've got Jewish pride. We won't let it hide, 'cause it comes from deep inside. So shout it out loud, Jewish pride.
Now, here is a life lesson. When things in your life seem almost too much to handle, when the COVID pandemic or the political turmoil in the country is driving you to despair, remember the large jar and the 2 cups of coffee. One day, my philosophy professor entered class carrying an apparently heavy carton and placed it on his desk. Without saying a word, he took from it a very large empty glass jar and filled it with golf balls. Then he asked us if the jar was full. We agreed that it was. The professor then picked up a box of pebbles and emptied it into the jar. He shook the jar and the pebbles rolled into the spaces between the golf balls. He asked again if the jar is now full, and we all agreed. Next, he picked up a box of sand and poured it into the jar. Of course, the sand filled up everything else. And then he asked us once more if the jar was full, and the response was a unanimous yes. Finally, the professor took 2 cups of coffee from under the desk and poured the entire content into the jar, effectively filling the empty spaces between the sand. We all laughed, somewhat puzzled. When the laughter subsided, the professor began. Now, I want you all to recognize that this jar represents your life. The golf balls are the important things. Your God, your family, your children, your health, your friends, and your passions. Things that if everything else was lost and only they remained, your life would still be full. The pebbles are the other things that matter, like the house and your car. The sand is everything else, the small stuff. If you were to put the sand into the jar first, there'd be no room for the pebbles and the golf balls. The same goes for your life. If you spend all your time and energy on the small stuff, you will never have room for the things that are important to you. Pay attention to the things that are critical for your happiness. Take your partner out to dinner, play with your children if you have any, take time to have medical checkups and play your favorite game. It'll take your mind off the heavy problems. There will always be time to fix the home and see to the laundry. Take care of the golf balls first, the things that really matter. Set your priorities. The rest is just sand. I then asked the professor what the coffee represented, and he smiled. I'm glad you asked, he replied. It just goes to show that no matter how full your life may seem, there is always room for a cup of coffee with a friend. Finally, cancel culture has reached Disneyland. The story of Snow White offends on 2 counts. When Prince Charming kisses Snow White, who awakes, he has assaulted her with a non-consensual kiss. Secondly, to accentuate her whiteness is racism. Here is some news just breaking. The Knesset Speaker, Yair Levin, has just announced that the date of the swearing-in of the new government will be Sunday, the 13th of June. There would still have been time to scupper the proposed government, but it seems that the last hope is fading. Nir Orbach, member of Knesset for Yamina, the last doubting MP, has surrendered to the new regime with these words: I have decided to end Israel's political stalemate. I have decided to vote in favor of the unity government. I'm treading down this path not with a joyful heart or because I want to. I'm treading down this path despite it being uncertain. But the eternal people aren't afraid of a long path. They fear the stalemate. Here is what Lenny Solomon thinks.
See the stones thrown through the sky. See the enemy on all sides. And we're waiting for you. It's our land and it's our faith. How much longer can we wait? And we're waiting for you to unite all Jews, to unite all
And so I come to the end of another magazine program covering the important events in Israel and the rest of the Jewish world. If you have any comments about this program, or suggestions, or even criticism, please write to Walter at israelnewstalkradio.com, where you will always get my personal reply, or you can post your comments on the appropriate place on the Walter Bingham file page on our website. I hope to be back again next week, same time, same place, with another selection of news, views and interviews from Israel and the rest of the Jewish world. Until then, this is Walter Bingham, wishing you a safe, happy and successful week. If where you are listening, COVID restrictions allow it, please visit your elderly neighbors. Go there to make sure that they have all they need. Thank you. Goodbye.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.